My name is Silvara Viralai. I am 36 years old. That Saturday was supposed to be my dad's 70th birthday picnic by the lake. The sky was bright and sunny and the water sparkled like diamonds. Birds were singing and the smell of fried chicken, burgers and pies floated through the air. There were big tables piled with all kinds of food. Music was playing loudly and everyone was laughing and pretending that our family was the happiest family in the world. I smiled at the sight, but deep down my heart was already feeling heavy. Before I continue, don't forget to subscribe and join the awesome community. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what you think of the story. My 11-year-old son, Caleb, reached for another burger. He had just eaten one, but it smelled so good he couldn't resist. My younger brother, Zephan, who was sitting across from him, looked straight at Caleb and said loudly so everyone could hear, "Kids who take too much food should wait for leftovers." The whole table burst into laughter. It was the kind of loud, mean laughter that makes your stomach hurt. Courtney, one of my cousins, laughed the loudest. Eloan, my older sister, shook her head with a smug little smile, as if she thought she was better than everyone else. Some of the cousins even clapped like it was a big show. My mom tried to cover her smile with her hand, but her eyes were twinkling with amusement. My dad, who was supposed to be the birthday boy, just stared at his beer, not saying a word. Caleb's hand froze in the air. His cheeks turned bright red like a tomato. I could feel the same burn I had swallowed for 9 long years since my husband had died in that horrible accident. Something inside me snapped completely. I couldn't let anyone laugh at my son like that. I stood up, took Caleb's hand and walked away from the table. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just walked, with the sound of their laughter following us across the grass. It felt like sharp little knives poking us as we left. By the time we reached the car, Caleb was shaking. I buckled him into his seat, closed the door and sat behind the wheel for a long, quiet minute. That was the last family picnic I ever went to. 12 hours later, every single laugh from that picnic had turned into something very different. Stay with me because this is the story of how laughter disappeared in that family. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me, you'll want to see it. We pulled into the underground garage at 8:09 p.m. Caleb was already asleep, leaning against the car door, his mouth open and one sneaker hanging off his foot. I carefully carried him up 2 flights of stairs, laid him on his bed and pulled the Spider-Man blanket up to his chin. He didn't stir. I left his door cracked open a little and walked back into the living room. The moment I set my keys down, my phone started vibrating like it wanted to escape. It was my mom. She had sent 8 missed messages in the last 45 minutes. The first one was at 7:51 p.m. "Val, you left so fast. Is Caleb okay? Call me when you get home." 8:02 p.m. Your dad and I were talking. The new building outside Fort Worth needs $2 million to start next month. You still know those quiet investors, right? It would be the perfect birthday gift for Dad. 8:11 p.m. Honey. 8:14 p.m. Silvara, answer me. 8:19 p.m. This isn't funny. 8:25 p.m. We really need this. 8:31 p.m. Please. 8:37 p.m. Fine, I'll wait. I flipped the phone face down and opened my MacBook. 9 years ago, a fully loaded 18-wheeler truck had crossed the median outside Waco and killed my husband in less than 3 seconds. The life insurance payout was $7,412,000. My family assumed I had spent it on my condo, Caleb's therapy and his private school tuition. The things they loved to bring up at every Thanksgiving. But they were wrong. I had wired every single dollar the same week to Caius Veyron, my old college friend from SMU. Caius now ran a quiet, low-profile finance company off the tollway. He never asked questions. He never told a soul. Starting the same month Caleb turned 3, every time Dad or Zephan needed cash fast to buy new trailers, add lanes, or stop the bank from calling, Caius stepped in. Caius made quiet purchases little by little, always through a company called an LLC registered in Delaware that nobody in my family had ever heard of. Year after year, quarter after quarter, Delaware LLC quietly bought pieces of Viralai freight lines. Eventually, it owned 35%, more than Eloan's 13%, more than Zephan's 10%, just shy of Dad's 37%. And that Delaware LLC answered to me and only me. I logged into the encrypted portal Caius built for me in 2017. The dashboard loaded instantly. 35% stared back at me in crisp black and white. I opened a new message and typed, "Caius, Begin immediate and total divestment of all Virali Freight Lines positions. Formal 30-day notice of intent to sell to be hand-delivered by courier to Thorin Virali first thing Monday morning. No extensions. No negotiations. No contact with any other party. Complete and clean separation. Silvara. His reply came in 19 seconds. Confirmed. Courier locked for 8:55 a.m. Monday delivery to company headquarters. All blocks are pre-cleared for rapid execution. I'm here if you need anything else. Caius. I shut the laptop and walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass with tap water but I didn't taste it. I stood at the window watching headlights crawl along the street 6 floors below. For 9 years I had sat at every Christmas table while Dad bragged that Virali Freight Lines was pure family, no outsiders. I nodded politely every 4th of July when he toasted, keeping it 100% Virali. I had watched Aloan be handed the CFO title at 34 and Zefin become CEO before he even turned 27. No one ever asked if I wanted a seat on the board. No one ever wondered where the mystery money came from every time they were about to miss payroll and suddenly weren't. They simply accepted that the widow and her fatherless son were being taken care of. I thought about Mom's favorite line, the one she always said with a soft hand on my arm. We'll always look after you and Caliph, honey. That's what family does. As if looking after meant letting her youngest son publicly humiliate my 11-year-old in front of cousins, aunts, uncles and second cousins twice removed. My phone lit up again. Another text from Mom. Did you reach out about the $2 million yet? We're really counting on you, sweetheart. It's for Dad. I pressed and held the power button until the screen went black. I set the phone down and walked back to Calip's room. He had rolled onto his side, one arm dangling off the mattress. I tucked it under the blanket and sat there for a long time. Tomorrow the formal notice would land on Dad's desk. Monday the banks would panic. Within 30 days, my father would finally learn exactly whose quiet money had kept his empire afloat for almost a decade. I leaned down and kissed Calip's forehead. No more waiting for scraps, baby, I whispered. This time I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Tuesday, 8:15 a.m. sharp. My phone rang while I was pouring Calip's orange juice. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at exactly 8:15. Same name. I picked it up. Silver, he said. His voice sounded rough like gravel. Headquarters conference room. No. I dropped Caliph at school, drove home and parked. By the time I walked through my front door, I already had 14 missed calls and 9 voicemails. Dad's first one left at 8:17 said, Courier just delivered papers. An LLC called MH Capital Holdings owns 35% of the company and filed intent to sell. The bank is blowing up my phone. Get here. My older sister Aloan called at 8:20. Silvera, if you've heard even a whisper about who MY Capital is, you need to tell us. This is life or death for the company. Zefin called at 8:23, practically screaming. Whoever orchestrated this waited until Dad's birthday week like the gutless coward they are. I will find them and bury them. I deleted everything and started the kettle. 23 minutes away, the Virali Freight Line's main building looked like a war room. Dad sat frozen at the head of the table, the thick courier envelope sliced open in front of him. Mom stood behind his chair, rubbing slow circles on his back, the same way she did when the company almost went under in 2009. Aloan stalked back and forth on her heels, phone on speaker, firing questions at the outside counsel. Zefin slammed a ream of printed stock transfer records onto the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. 35%, he roared. That's more than me. More than Aloan. Almost as much as Dad. How does some anonymous Delaware shell end up with that much of our company without a single one of us noticing? Aloan killed the lawyer and collapsed into a chair. It wasn't one purchase, she said, her voice tight. There were dozens. Every single time we took private cash instead of a bank loan over the last 8+ years, the same buyer was on the other side. We were so relieved to dodge interest payments. We never ran full diligence on the purchaser. Dad finally looked up from the letter, eyes bloodshot. Who, he asked slowly. Is MH Capital Holdings? No one had an answer. Zefin kicked the leg of the table. This is a textbook hostile play, he snarled. Somebody has been squatting on this block for years, waiting for blood in the water. I'm calling every private equity guy I know. Somebody out there has heard rumors. Eloane was already scrolling through her contacts. None of the big carriers have this kind of patience, she said. This took almost a decade of disciplined buying. Mom's phone buzzed in her hand. She stared at the screen and went pale. It's the First National, she whispered. They want all of us in their boardroom at 11. Dad closed his eyes for a long second. Tell them we'll be there, he said. Zephan stormed out, shoulder clipping the door frame on his way. Eloane stayed behind, spreading the transfer records across the table like puzzle pieces. Every block is the same, she muttered. Same registered agent in Wilmington. Same signature on file. Veyron. Dad's head snapped up. Veyron, he repeated. As in Caius Veyron? Silvara's old college friend. Eloane froze. It could be a coincidence, she said, but her voice shook. Mom shook her head slowly. She would never. Zephan burst back in, face red. Bank just emailed. They said they're requiring an emergency board meeting tomorrow and full personal financial statements from every shareholder over 5% by Friday. Dad leaned back in his chair like someone had punched him in the chest. The 30-day clock started yesterday, he said quietly. If we can't come up with roughly $24 million in cash, they can sell to anyone they want. He looked around the table at the three faces that were supposed to be his succession plan. Meeting with the bank in 90 minutes, he said. Everybody be ready to put houses, retirement accounts, everything on the table. Eloane nodded once, already typing. Zephan punched the wall again, hard enough to split the skin on his knuckles. Back in my apartment, I stood at the kitchen window, drinking tea I didn't taste. The city lights twinkled below. Cars moved slowly along the streets. The air smelled faintly of rain. I thought about Caliph, still asleep, safe in his bed. I thought about the years I had spent helping this family quietly, making sure they always had money when they needed it while they laughed at my child. And now, finally, it was time for the truth to come out. My phone kept buzzing and ringing on the counter. New calls, new texts, new voicemails. It never stopped. I didn't answer a single one. I left every message unread. I already knew what they wanted. I already knew what they felt. I also knew exactly how the conference room at the bank smelled that morning. Burnt coffee, worry, and fear. The kind of fear that makes people's hands shake, their voices tremble, and their eyes wide. I knew the second Dad saw the letter from M. Halt about the transfer records, the perfect family story they had built would start to crack. But they hadn't said my name out loud yet. Not once. The worry began at exactly 9:42 a.m. on Tuesday morning, just minutes after they had walked out of the bank empty-handed. Mom was the first to call. Her voice was soft, trembling almost like a leaf in the wind. Honey, please just tell us what you know. I let it ring. At 10:03, Eloane, my older sister, called. Silvara, this is bigger than family drama. Dad is shaking. Literally shaking. Pick up. I declined the call. At 10:18, my younger brother Zephan's call came through. The little voice preview popped up on my phone. I could hear him shouting already. You can't just vanish while everything collapses. I sent it straight to voicemail. By Wednesday afternoon, the texts were non-stop. Dad sent a photo of the dispatch screen. 0 new jobs booked. Mom sent a crying selfie. I can't watch him lose everything, she wrote. Thursday night at 11:51 p.m., the doorbell rang for the first time. Mom appeared on the Ring camera, soaked from the rain, holding a foil-covered casserole dish like it was a peace treaty. She rang the bell 6 times, whispered, "I'm so sorry," into the camera and left the food on the doorstep. She walked away crying. I watched her disappear into the rain. Friday 6:27 p.m., Dad appeared alone. He stood under the porch light for 9 full minutes, hands buried in his coat pockets, staring at my door like he could open it with willpower. He never rang the bell. He didn't knock. He just stood there and then finally turned and walked away. Saturday morning, 11 a.m., Eloane arrived with 2 to-go cups from my favorite coffee shop. She sat on the hallway carpet back against my door for 51 minutes. Occasionally she spoke to the peephole. I brought your usual 2 pumps of vanilla oat milk. Please, Val, just open the door. She finally left the coffee cups on the floor and walked away. That same night at 12:13 a.m. the pounding began. Zephan. I watched the black and white ring feed. He hammered the door with the side of his fist, hard enough to make the frame shiver. Silvara. Open this door right now. You think hiding fixes anything? Dad might lose the company he built with his own hands. He kicked the bottom panel of the door once. I saw Calith's bedroom light on an hour ago. Tell him Uncle Zephin is out here freezing because his mom wants to play martyr. He waited. I stayed silent. Then he left the longest voicemail yet. It's television, Zephin. I don't know what's going on in your head, but this has gone far enough. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Mom hasn't eaten in 2 days. If you know who MY Capital is, if you have even one contact that can help, use it. We're begging you. Family doesn't do this to family. Silvara, call me. He hung up, slammed the door with his shoulder one last time and left. Sunday afternoon, Courtney showed up with a bright pink gift bag addressed to Calith. Inside was a new Nintendo Switch game and a card that said, Uncle Zephin was only kidding, buddy. Let's play soon. Love, Aunt C. I dropped the whole thing in the trash, unopened. Monday they tried even harder. Dad's truck in Alohan's SUV blocked 2 visitor spots from 7 a.m. They took turns buzzing every apartment on the 6th floor until security threatened to call the police. I watched from the window as they argued in the parking lot for 27 minutes before finally driving off. Tuesday, Mom slid a 3-page handwritten letter under the door. I read the first line, "We never meant to make you feel like an outsider." I carried it straight to the shredder. Wednesday, 2:37 a.m. Zephin returned, clearly drunk. He slumped against my door and spoke in a low, broken voice. I'm sorry. I was a complete mess. I'll apologize to Calith myself. Just tell me what MY Capital wants. Money? A seat? We'll give them anything. Just stop this. He stayed for 41 minutes. I never moved. Thursday, Alohan left a voicemail that actually made me stop breathing for a second. Dad's in the ER. Chest pains. They're keeping him overnight for tests. If you have a heart, call. I didn't. Friday they went nuclear. All 5 of them, Mom, Dad, Alohan, Zephin, even Courtney, camped in the lobby at 6 p.m. They rotated calling, texting, buzzing. Security called me 3 times. I told them I was out of town. By the end of week 2, my phone registered 389 missed calls, 247 unread texts and 34 voicemails. Every ring, every message, every face on my screen was my family in every kind of weather, showing every stage of desperation. Calith asked once very quietly why Grandma kept leaving containers outside. I told him she was just dropping off treats and ruffled his hair. Every night, I double-checked the deadbolt, silenced the ringer, poured chamomile tea I never drank and sat in the dark living room. They were getting closer to the truth. But they still hadn't said my name out loud in connection with MH Capital. Not once. Week 3 started with a certified letter from First National Bank slid under the headquarters door at 5:47 a.m. Dad found it while making coffee. It was thick and cream-colored, his name in raised ink. He carried it to his office, slid it open and read the single page twice before the words sank in. The letter said in simple words, all credit facilities including the $28 million revolving line, were frozen immediately until the 35% ownership issue was resolved. No new advances. No exceptions. Dad walked to the conference room holding the letter like it was radioactive. Alohan arrived at 7 a.m., read over his shoulder and went completely still. That's the oxygen, she whispered. We can't run trucks without fuel cards and payroll loans. At 9:12 a.m. the second hammer fell. An email from Apex Distribution landed in Dad's inbox, accounting for 29% of total revenue. The subject line, immediate suspension of all contracts. Dad opened it on the projector so the whole room could see. The email said, because of changes in ownership structure, Apex Distribution was pausing all active agreements. Service would only resume once written confirmation of stable ownership and continued financial capacity was provided. Required documentation had to be submitted within 10 business days. Zephin read it aloud, his voice rising with every sentence until he was shouting the last line. Then he spun around and drove his fist straight through the drywall. 10 business days. We don't even have a current valuation. Mom stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like a life vest. Payroll is 8 days away, she said quietly. Alohan was already running calculations on her laptop. Without the credit line and with Apex on hold, they were short $800,000 just for driver pay, fuel and insurance for next Friday. Dad picked up the phone and called the bank president he'd known since 1998. Speaker on. I'm sorry, the man said before Dad could finish. The credit committee met at 8. Until the ownership cloud lifts, no officer can override. It's out of my hands. Zephan kicked a metal trash can so hard it dented. By noon, 3 smaller shippers sent identical suspension notices, each citing prudent counterparty risk. By 2 p.m. the fuel card provider called. Virali Freight Line's accounts moved to prepaid status effective Monday. For drivers were posting on private Facebook groups. Virali's credit is frozen. Start looking. Wednesday, Apex followed up with a 17-page demand packet. 5 years of audited financials, personal financial statements for every shareholder, over 5% liquidity proof, updated certificates of insurance, everything. Eloan canceled her kids' soccer practice and stayed at the office until dawn pulling files. Thursday morning, the yard that usually roared with engines sat half empty. Drivers stood in small knots, phones out, reading the same rumors. Dad stopped going home. He kept a duffel in his office and showered in the mechanic's bay. Mom brought meatloaf no one touched. Zephan hadn't slept in 72 hours. Courtney told Mom he paced the house all night on conference calls with distressed asset funds in Dallas, offering anything for a quick bid on the 35% block. Every call ended the same. Who exactly is MH Capital Holdings and why are they selling now? No one had an answer they were willing to say out loud. By Friday, the company that once bragged about 48 straight years of on-time payroll was staring at the very real possibility of bouncing direct deposits for the first time ever. The dispatch board stayed dark. The phones stayed silent. And in every frantic meeting, every whispered hallway conversation, every prayer muttered in the break room, they still danced around the one name none of them had dared to speak in connection with the 35% ownership. They were running out of days and they were running out of excuses. Day 26, Friday. The phone rang at 7:06 a.m. while I was tying Calith's shoes. Dad's name appeared on the screen. I answered this time. His voice came through cracked and trembling like an old man I didn't recognize. Silvera, it's finished. We lost everything. We lost it all. He didn't wait for me to respond. At 4 o'clock yesterday, Crestview Capital walked in with the only offer on the table. 18% of fair market value for the entire 35% block. They demanded 3 board seats and full veto rights on any contract over $3 million. If we didn't sign by 5 today, they'd walk and the bank would start forced liquidation Monday morning. Payroll bounces Tuesday. A long shaky breath. I signed it. I had no choice. I stayed silent. He kept going. Words spill faster. I built this from 2 trucks and a leased trailer. 50 years of my life. And now strangers own more than I do because we couldn't raise $24 million in 26 days. No one else even bid. I just needed you to hear it from me before it hits the news. The line stayed open. I said nothing. At 4:11 p.m., the signing took place in the same conference room where Dad once cut his own birthday cake every July. Dad sat at the head, shaking so badly he had to grip the papers with both hands. Mom stood behind him, tears dripping straight onto his shirt. Eloan stared at the documents like they were a death sentence. My little brother Zephan was standing with his back against the wall. His arms were crossed tightly, and his jaw was clenched so hard I could see it even from across the room. He looked very upset and angry. The man from Crestview Capital named Evan Park walked into the room. He looked very serious, wore a perfect suit, and his face did not show a single emotion. He placed a big stack of papers in front of Dad. Dad looked up at all of us one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered quietly. Then he picked up a pen and signed the first page. After that, he signed the second page. Page 3, page 4. There were 10 pages in total, each one requiring a signature. Dad's hand shook a little and each signature took longer than the one before. I could see that it was very hard for him to do this. When the final page was done, Evan Park picked up the papers, slid them into a black folder and stood up. Congratulations, he said in a flat, serious voice. Crestview now controls Virali Freight Lines. Our directors will be in place Monday. Expect new rules and new ways of running things by Wednesday. He did not shake anyone's hand. He just turned and walked out of the room. Eloan was the first to speak. They have 3 seats on the board and veto rights, she said. That means they can block anything we want to do. They can even starve the company if they want. Zephan laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was ugly and angry. They just bought 35% of our company for almost nothing, he said, and now they have the legal right to slowly take apart the company piece by piece. Mom started crying softly at first, then louder. Dad stayed seated in his chair, staring at his own signature like it wasn't even his. Eloan pulled the new company numbers up on the computer screen. Crestview Capital now owned 35% of the company. Dad only had 32.1% left. Eloan had 11.7% and Zephan had 9%. The rest was owned by employees and small holders. Dad was no longer the majority owner of the company that still had his name on it. Zephan finally looked at Dad. "You just sold our birthright for almost nothing," he said. Dad's answer was barely audible. "Payroll is 6 days away. Fuel cards are frozen. Apex has already taken 60% of our trucks. The bank was ready to take the trucks on Monday. I had to keep the doors open." No one argued. We all just sat quietly, letting the weight of the situation sink in. The room felt heavy with sadness. It felt like a dream we had been living in was slowly dying right in front of our eyes. At 5:49 p.m. my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I looked at it and saw a message that said, "Transaction complete. $240,000 wired to your account. Pleasure doing business, Caius." I set the phone down, walked to the balcony, and watched the city lights start to flicker on as the sun went down. Across town, the man who had once promised that Virali Freight Lines would always stay in the family had just given control to a private equity company for almost nothing. And he didn't even know that the money they had used to buy the company came from me, the daughter he had treated like an outsider for years. 2 months after the signing, the boardroom felt like a courtroom. The 3 Crestview appointees sat on one side of the table. Park was in the middle with 2 silent partners on either side, both in identical navy suits. Dad sat at the head of the table out of habit, but everyone knew the real power had shifted. Mom was not allowed to attend. Eloan and Zephan took seats opposite the new owners. They looked exhausted and pale, like they hadn't slept in weeks. The questioning began at exactly 9 a.m. and lasted 6 long, stressful hours. Park opened a thick binder and didn't smile once. "Revenue is down 29% since closing," he said. "Operating margins have dropped from 11% to -4%. Explain." Eloan started by explaining the problems caused by Apex suspending services and how it affected other shippers. Zephan tried to explain the driver retention bonuses. Every answer they gave was met with the same flat stare from Park. At noon, Park slid 2 spreadsheets across the table. "Option 1, he said. "We inject $15 million in new capital, but only if you execute the following restructuring within 60 days. A 28% reduction in headcount across terminals, 45% salary cuts for all officers and senior management, immediate sale of the Kansas City depot and termination of the legacy pension top-up." Zephan leaned forward. "You want us to fire 1,000 drivers and cut our own pay almost in half?" "Correct," Park said. "Or option 2, we decline to fund the company. Next quarter the bank forces Chapter 11. Your choice." Eloan's voice shook. "These drivers have been with us for 20 or 30 years. You can't just..." Park interrupted. "We control the board. We control the money. You kept the name on the door. We kept the votes." Dad finally spoke softly. "You're asking me to sign termination letters for men who helped me build this company." "I said sign or watch it die completely," Park replied. The room went silent. Zephan's knuckles turned white from gripping the edge of the table. Eloan stared at the numbers on the spreadsheets as if she could make them change by wishing. At 3:07 p.m. Park closed the binder. "You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to deliver the signed resolutions. After that, we withhold the funding and let the banks take over." He and the 2 silent partners stood, gathered their folders and left without another word. The door clicked shut. Dad looked 10 years older in just a few seconds. Eloan put her head in her hands. Zephan stood up so fast that his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. "They just turned us into employees in our own company," he said. Eloan looked up, her eyes red from crying. "If we fight this, we lose everything. If we sign, we keep the lights on, but we destroy the culture Dad spent 50 years building." Dad stared at the empty chairs where the new owners had Saturday. "I already gave them control to save the company," he whispered. "Now they want me to help them kill it." No one answered. We all filed out of the room separately, not looking at each other. That night, the termination list was drafted. There were 142 names on it. Some of the employees had worked at the company for more than 30 years. The salary cut memo was also written, showing that Dad, Eloan, and Zephan would now earn less than half of what they had been making just 2 months ago. By morning, the resolutions were signed in the same shaky blue ink. At 4:52 p.m., the documents were couriered to Crestview's office downtown. 15 minutes later, the $15 million was wired into the company account. It was just enough to keep the company doors open for another quarter. Across town, I closed my banking app after seeing the final payment clear into the original LLC. Then I booked 2 one-way tickets to Portland for the following week. The company my father had bragged would always stay 100% in the family was now officially on life support. Strangers owned it, strangers who had paid pennies for control and demanded cuts and layoffs. The family that once treated me like an outsider had just learned what it really felt like to be powerless. 4 months after the big picnic, I taped the last moving box shut. The apartment was empty except for the echo of our footsteps. Caliph carried his small backpack and his stuffed shark, the one he refused to pack himself. I took one last look at the living room wall, where his height marks used to climb every birthday, and then I closed the door. The landlord already had the keys. Outside, the moving truck waited. Portland, Oregon, 2,000 miles away and 1 time zone difference. I had bought a small cedar house on a quiet street, just 10 minutes from the ocean. No one in the family knew the address. And they never would. The rumors trickled in anyway through old neighbors and mutual friends. Zephan and Courtney lost their house in Preston Hollow. The bank foreclosed 2 weeks after the second round of pay cuts. They were now living apart. He took the dogs. He took the least fancy BMW that had already been repossessed last month. Dad sold the big house on Straight Lane, the one with the pool and guest house where all the grandchildren had learned to swim. He and Mom moved into a 2-bedroom condo near the medical center so he could be close to his new cardiologist. Eloan still went to the office every day, but the building looked half empty. Drivers left in waves after the layoffs. The Virali Freight Line sign still hung above the gate, but now the trucks rolling out had a tiny Crestview logo beneath it. I never answered a single message from my family. Not the frantic ones, not the angry ones, not the broken ones that came after they finally figured out that MH Capital Holdings had come from me, the daughter they had ignored for years. I changed all our numbers the day the truck was loaded. New phones, new carriers, new everything. Caliph climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV and buckled himself in. "Are we really never coming back?" he asked quietly. I started the engine. "Never," I said. He nodded once, holding his stuffed shark to the window and watching Dallas disappear in the side mirror. We crossed the Red River before lunch. By nightfall we could smell salt in the air. The new house smelled like fresh paint and pine. Caliph picked the bedroom with the slanted ceiling and the window that looked out toward the ocean. I hung his height chart on the wall and marked the first line. Day 1 in Oregon. That night I sat on the porch and listened to the actual quiet. No sirens, no notifications, no ghosts of the past. Somewhere behind us, the company my father had promised would always stay in the family was being carved up by men in suits who never changed clothes. Somewhere behind us, Zephan, who had once called my son a freeloader, was sleeping on a friend's couch. Somewhere behind us, Dad and Mom were learning what it really felt like to need charity and help from others. I left them all in the rearview mirror without a single glance back. Caliph came outside in his pajamas, barefoot on the cool wooden porch. "Mom," he whispered softly, "I can hear the waves." I pulled him onto my lap. "That's our new sound," I said. He fell asleep against my shoulder. I carried him inside, tucked him in, and closed the bedroom door. Then I walked back to the porch, looked up at a sky full of stars I had never seen in Dallas, and finally let myself breathe. We were gone. We were free. We were finished.